On the day this video goes live, Pokémon Pokopia turns 3 months old. That time has flown by, and I've got to say, the game has absolutely surpassed every expectation I had for it before it launched back in March. And so that begs the question, is Pokopia the best Pokemon spin-off game there has ever been? That's a very hard question to answer, but in this video I'm going to look at 3 key areas that can hopefully help us to come to some sort of joint decision here. We're going to look at the game's review scores and compare those to past Pokemon games to look at how the game compares in the eyes of professional critics. We'll look at the game's sales figures to see how fans and players have actually reacted to its release compared to other spin-offs. And maybe most importantly, we'll also dive into the games themselves. How enjoyable is Pokopia to actually play? Are there any forgotten gem style spin-offs from years ago that are just as fun and should also be considered for this best spin-off ever title? So get comfy and get your thinking caps on, because if any other awesome Pokemon spin-off games come to mind whilst watching this video, I'd love to hear all about the fond memories you have of those in the comments. Let's get into this. Okay, let's start then with the reviews. Now, reviews aren't everything. That's why we're looking at several different areas in this video. But when you consolidate a game's review scores and find the average, they do tend to tell a pretty accurate story of how good a game is. Now, this has kind of blown me away a bit, to be honest. And I did speak about this briefly in a recent video where I explained that these review scores were one of the main reasons I actually decided to buy the game right at launch. But here's how Pokemon Pokopia was reviewed by the press. Looking at Metacritic, a site that aggregates the review scores from all the top accredited publications, Pokopia has scored 89. That's out of 100, as you probably know or would guess. And if you need some context, 89 is a fantastic score. Like, it's seriously good. For the past few years now, the highest rated game of the year within the entire industry has tended to have been rated somewhere around 94 to 96. That's games like Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3 and Astro Bot. Games that took home multiple Game of the Year awards and all sorts. So Pokopia sitting at 89 shows it's really not that far off being something incredibly special. For more context, at the time of me putting this video together, Pokopia is actually tied for being the best rated game of 2026 so far, currently sitting neck and neck with Capcom's Resident Evil Requiem, which is very high company to be in indeed. So, it's absolutely smashed it in the reviews department. Wonderful. But to try and answer this question of whether Pokopia is truly the best Pokemon spin-off ever, we obviously need to compare its score to past Pokemon titles. And it's this, what you're about to see here, that really influenced that whole me being blown away by the score thing I mentioned earlier. It turns out that Pokopia has become the best reviewed Pokemon game of all time. Not just the best spin-off, not just the best Pokemon game in recent years on Switch and on Switch 2, but the best ever. Here's a handy list for you. So, as we know, we have Pokopia on 89, but look at all these games below it. Pokemon X and Y at 87 and 88 respectively. Quite a few games at 87 actually, so Sun and Moon, Black and White, and even Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which are regularly considered to be the best Pokemon games ever by fans. All of these below Pokopia though, and then Diamond and Pearl at the bottom there on 85. If you'd have told me this time last year that we were going to get this spin-off game where you play as a Ditto and it's going to review better than Heart Gold and Soul Silver did, I'd have very politely laughed in your face. That's just unbelievable to me. You'll notice that all the games below Pokopia on that list are actually main series titles as well, which have historically been considered the best that Pokemon has to offer. We haven't even got to any other spin-offs yet. So if we go further down the list to try and find some spin-offs, and to do that I'll skip a few mainline games here, but we have Legend ZA on 83, although the Pokemon Company and Game Freak do technically consider that game to be a mainline title as well. So really, we're going all the way down to 80, where we find Pokemon Conquest, which was a Nintendo DS title that I'll talk about more in the final part of this discussion, and then New Pokemon Snap and Pokken Tournament DX, which both scored at 79. So it's 9 points higher than the next best spin-off, and it's top of the entire list ahead of every single Pokemon game that's come before it. I think we can safely say that Pokopia has passed the test in the reviews department. Let's move on then to the second point on our list, which is the game's sales. Now, you may or may not know that historically, Pokemon's main series games, and just to explain for anyone who might be wondering what on earth that is, we're talking about the major new titles that kick off a new generation and come in pairs and sometimes as an updated version, so like Red, Blue and Yellow, Gold, Silver and Crystal, or recently Scarlet and Violet, as well as any remakes of those titles like Fire Red and Leaf Green, for example. Those games, the main series games, have always sold the best by a long, long way. Pokemon's best-selling spin-off game has actually sold fewer copies than the worst-selling main series game, just to sort of put into context the difference in popularity between the two types of game. Now, Pokopia's only been out for 3 months, and sales figures for spin-off titles aren't publicly reported all that well. I won't bore you with why, but it's basically down to the publishing of the spin-offs being handled differently in Japan, and we don't tend to see full sales figures as a result. But anyway, Nintendo did provide us with an accurate update of Pokopia's sales after its first 5 weeks on the market. This information came from a financial results report that Nintendo published in May, which confirmed that Pokopia sold more than 4 million copies in its first 5 weeks. Again, that doesn't mean all that much without context. So, now as I mentioned, bear in mind that for quite a few of these spin-offs, these reported totals aren't 100% accurate. They will have sold a bit more than the numbers shown here, but these figures are sort of safe totals. We know that the games have sold at least these numbers. So as you can see, Pokopia is already, we think, the 5th best-selling Pokemon spin-off ever, and that's after just 5 weeks of it being available in stores. That's also only the case when you combine the total sales of the 2 mystery dungeon pairs on this list. If they were split, Pokopia would be even higher. But because we do usually combine the sales of multi-version Pokemon games into one, because they're sort of considered a single release, this list does make sense to be the way to do it. If you're curious, just because I happened to mention it before, the worst selling main series Pokemon game is Pokemon Crystal. Crystal doesn't have a second version that it's paired with, so all of those third or updated main series games like Crystal, Emerald, Platinum for example, are all towards the bottom of the sales list. And the best selling are the original Pokemon Red, Green and Blue, which have sold a ridiculous 31 million copies plus between them. But anyway, the point here is that in just 5 weeks, and being a game that's exclusive to a console that's only been out for a year and therefore doesn't have the largest audience, Pokopia has sold very, very well. In fact, as of March this year, the Switch 2 itself has sold just under 20 million units, which means, if I've done my maths correctly, that roughly 1 in 5 Switch owners have already bought Pokopia. So let's bring that table back up. It hasn't sold the most copies of any spin-off just yet, but it's certainly on track to do so, and I think we can safely put this as an almost. Does that seem fair? Okay, let's move on to the third and final part of this discussion then. And a quick note just to say that if you've been enjoying this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. It means you'll be much more likely to see my future videos just like this one in your feed going forwards, and it also really helps me to be able to keep doing this and keep making these videos for you. So thank you so much to anyone who does. So here we are at the most subjective part of the video. Is Pokopia the best Pokemon spin-off in terms of how fun it is to play? In terms of the gameplay that it offers, how memorable it will be years down the line, and just generally how fondly are we going to look back at this game? We've had countless spin-offs over the years, lots of them behind me here, and this is where I'd really value seeing your opinions in the comments as well, because I think we'll all probably have different ones that stand out to us for various different reasons. I've spoken in the past about how much I always adored Pokemon Snap, for example, on the Nintendo 64 back in the day, and a large part of that is because it felt like such a different experience compared to other traditional Pokemon games. It really captured my attention and imagination at the time, and now it's just the most wonderful, nostalgic thing for me. But that's all very personal to me, of course. Pokemon Conquest, which we briefly mentioned earlier because it's the second highest rated spin-off behind Pokopia, is another interesting one. I actually didn't play this until years after it released. I only picked it up a few years ago, so I don't have the nostalgia attachment to this one, but I can see why it was so highly regarded because, again, it felt different in a good way, with a fundamental quality to it that just left you thinking, yeah, this is good. This isn't a cheap spin-off with no substance. It's a great tactical RPG in its own right. Very quickly, some other special mentions for me include Pokemon Stadium, again on the N64, nostalgic, iconic, it was wonderful for its time. Pokemon Trading Card Game for the Game Boy is a surprisingly wonderful little game. New Pokemon Snap for the Nintendo Switch, I think, takes everything I loved about the original but expands upon it, offers so much more, and is a genuinely fantastic experience that I'd urge everyone to check out. So there have been lots of great spin-offs over the years, and whilst it's really hard for me to say whether I consider Pokopia to be better than them, there are at least two categories in which, for me at least, Pokopia has managed to outdo everything that's come before it. And they are, firstly, how pleasantly surprised I was left by it, by the quality of it and the fun I've had with it. I think of all Pokemon games, not just the spin-offs, this is the one where my experience with it has outweighed the expectations I had for it going into it by the largest margin. I just didn't think I'd love it as much as I do, and so it's such a nice feeling to have played it and loved it. And the second thing is the longevity. There aren't many Pokemon spin-offs that I'd gladly play for 100 hours or more, because usually they're not designed to be played like that. And a game's length isn't everything, but the fact that this offers so many hours of gameplay, it's sort of endless, really. And importantly, that the fun and the quality of it remains so high consistently throughout all of those hours. Maybe that makes it a slightly more complete experience than past spin-offs have offered. I recently talked in depth about the best parts of Pokemon Pokopia, so feel free to head there and give that a watch when this video finishes if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on it. But yeah, let's get back to that table. And again, I think I'm going to put a slightly vague, quite possibly, in this row. Is Pokopia the best ever spin-off? I'll let you have the last say in the comments. Thank you very much for sticking with me right through to the end. Please do make sure to subscribe to the channel for more chill, positivity-focused Pokemon discussion just like this video. I have more videos talking about Pokopia on the channel that you might like to watch next. I'll leave links to all of those in the description, so go ahead and check that out if you want to watch something else. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.